When celebrated TV screenwriter Paddy Chayefsky set out to write a film that critiqued mass media, he did so with an insider knowledge of exactly what made the industry tick. In his 1976 critique of news entertainment, Network, he and director Sidney Lumet set out to dissect the television industry. We will explore how their use of postmodernist techniques, aided by the use of genre conventions, allows the audience to reconsider their stance on television and mass media in general. We will then explore the messages communicated by these techniques, and how they are supported by Klosowski's idea of living currency, and Baudrillard's observation of an acceleration towards natural extremes in the media. Finally, we shall extrapolate our findings onto the modern world, and consider why Network is perhaps even more relevant today than it was almost 50 years ago.
Network by Paddy Chayefsky, directed by Sidney Lumet, produced by Howard Gottfried.
This essay is split into two major sections. Section 1, Setting Up, regards the concept of genre, specifically concerning both Steve Neale's belief that genres consist of, quote, systems of expectation and hypothesis which spectators bring with them to the cinema, end quote, as well as Thomas Schatz's statement that, quote, a genre film involves familiar, essentially one-dimensional characters acting out a predictable story pattern within a familiar setting. These approaches to genre will be applied to the setting and characters of Network to explore how Chayefsky and Lumet recreate the feel of a contemporary evening news show. Section 2, Knocking Down, discusses the postmodernist tools that Chayefsky and Lumet employ to, quote-unquote, play with these established elements of genre to destabilise the audience's position to both the text and to media in general. I will explore how these tools are used to dissect a world like Network's, and like ours, that values totalising narratives. We will be exploring how the film shifts between, quote, front stage, end quote, and, quote, backstage, end quote, at the news station. Front stage is the area that the audience is used to seeing, where the behaviours of the station staff is as expected. On the other hand, backstage, however, are the areas out of audience view, where the true nature of the station is revealed. Now, it can be difficult to pinpoint exactly what constitutes postmodernism, but it can be defined as, quote, a set of critical, strategic, and rhetorical practices employing concepts such as difference, repetition, the trace, the simulacrum, and hyperreality to destabilize other concepts such as presence, identity, historical progress, epistemic certainty, and the univocity of meaning. Unquote. Now, that's quite a lot to take in. So, instead, I shall explain it using the metaphor of a toolbox that is filled with various techniques with which one can imitate, mock, critique, or question societal concepts or institutions that seem unquestionable. One of these tools is the concept of play, or free play, proposed by Derrida, as a means by which the audience's position to the text can be destabilized. This is done first by simulating the subject, much like Baudrillard's fatal strategy, of taking the subject to its natural extreme, but instead focusing on what can be changed within the structure of the subject. In our case, we'll be analysing how Derrida's use of play is employed by Chayefsky and Lumet to destabilise what they establish using genre as the expected structure of an ordinary news programme, and what this makes the audience consider about the mass media industry. Network introduces Beale's news segment in a standard fashion. We briefly see the control room, where the various people running the show chat inaudibly. The camera then pans to the various camera angles they have of Beale. When the camera cuts to Beale in the studio, it is placed directly next to the camera angle that we were seeing on the screen. In fact, we can even see the camera, smoothly transitioning us to Beale's segment. He appears to be the one-dimensional news anchor that we would expect. He speaks in a formal, level tone befitting his position, and is dressed in a suit not unlike one Walter Cronkite would wear. So far, this is what we would expect from a, professional news program like UBS Evening News, and especially what we would expect of a, quote, one-dimensional character, unquote, like anchorman Howard Beale. Let's come back to this later. I'll just leave this, here. Now, if you've heard of Network, you probably know this scene. This is Howard Beale in his first Network-sanctioned rant. Nick Lacey proposes that in tandem with Neale's system of expectation from the audience, we must also consider how a genre and setting is intentionally evoked by producers of media by using what he describes as, quote, generic elements, unquote. He also describes how mise-en-scène, or rather the use of elements within the text, is also used to suggest a genre, and provides his own list for what constitutes mise-en-scène, shown here. With this in mind, let's consider what generic elements Chayefsky and Lumet employ to convince the viewer that the Howard Beale Show is like any other news show. When the scene begins, we're greeted by the Beale Show set. from just behind one of the live cameras, a framing that emulates the contemporary news show technique of zooming out on the studio as the credits roll. Now that zoom out is notably one of the only times in news programming that the audience is privy to the rest of the studio, but still it's within that controlled environment and with all the microphones off. Take note of the colours here. A strong use of the colour brown and many wooden furnishings, panellings and embellishments, a feature common to 1970s news sets. Let's watch a little more, with sound.
We know the air is unfit to breathe and our food is unfit to eat. We sit watching our TVs while some local newscaster tells us that today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be.
Alright, definitive lack of music as one would expect from a news report, and take a look at that framing, how it is now strongly on one side. By using these generic elements in tandem, Chayefsky and Lumet successfully evoke the feeling and the expectation, quote, of an evening news broadcast. The one non-generic element in this scene is Beale himself. He appears flustered and perhaps overly emotive, and is he wearing pyjamas? Remember that scene we shelved? Where was it again? Oh, here it is. Let's continue playing the clip.
Since this show was the only thing I had going for me in my life, I have decided to kill myself. I'm going to blow my brains out right on this program a week from today.
In his book Writing Indifference, first published in 1967, French philosopher Jacques Derrida states that, quote, a structure permits the play of elements inside its total form, unquote. What this means, in practice, is that once a structure has been established, such as the generic structure of a news program, there are a variety of ways this structure can then be played with. Bringing back that list of generic elements, we can see that in this scene, after setting the audience up to expect an ordinary news program, that instead, the behaviour of our supposed one-dimensional character is turned on its head. The anchorman announces his planned suicide, and the people with the ability to stop the action and tend to him, the people in the control room whose conversations so far have been inaudible and professional seeming, are seen laughing and not paying attention. This returns us to Meyrowitz's idea of front stage and backstage. By subverting the audience's expectation in this scene, using the postmodernist tool of playing with the usual structure, and then showing the audience these backstage behaviours that run contrary to the professionalism the audience would expect from news broadcasters, Chayefsky and Lumet successfully destabilise the audience's position to mass media. The UBS staff then order Howard to be violently removed from the studio and grow angry at him rather than showing any ounce of concern. The questions now on the audience's mind are, who are these people? What right do they have to report on the truth? What are their true motivations, if not merely reporting the unbiased truth? When it develops that Beale's propensity for bombastic proclamations are, in fact, good for business, the entertainment sector of UBS takes him under their wing and gives him his own show despite his declining mental state. We see the shady businessmen and women behind the scenes at UBS making these decisions, and despite Chayefsky's use of play to heighten their evil characteristics, they still fit well within the one-dimensional characterization audiences have come to expect from lawyers and businessmen within films about show business. So Chayefsky effortlessly convinces the audience that such people will be allowed to exist within the world of network, even with their heightened flaws, and, by extension, they would be allowed to exist within the current media industry. All of their decisions, the decision to exploit Howard Beale, fit their characterization and make perfect sense within the context of media as a money-making business. Or as Beale puts it,
we're in the boredom-killing business.
Smith explains Klosowski's idea of living currency as the concept that human beings can, quote, function as currency because they are sources of sensation, emotion, and pleasure, unquote. This is an idea that Chayefsky saw in practice in the television industry. Yet, due to the media industry existing in a world of extremes where each thrill has to top the next, a situation described as the, quote, principle of evil by Baudrillard, Beale's rants become further and further removed from the generic elements of a news show. Eventually, all that is left of Howard Beale and the news program that he was so proud of that he'd rather die than lose it is a sad, vulnerable man on stage ranting to the audience until he collapses, night after night. Beale, his humanity now tokenized into the brand of the mad prophet of the airways by UBS, eventually begins to lose value. His rants stop being so extreme, begin being sour in tone. He loses viewers, his currency loses value with UBS. So they have him killed. Another logical decision made in a businessman's office. Merely by playing with the characterization of a once generic news anchor and a few people behind the scenes, by mixing postmodern techniques with generic conventions and environments, Chayefsky and Lumet are able to convey their message about the real and actual harm done by commercialized mass media in a way that allows audiences to reach this conclusion themselves, without it feeling forced or preachy. That is how they convince an audience that the media's gone mad. But that was then, and this is now. So, what's the significance of network today? What is the significance of media as an industry, reducing human beings to their brands, and then demanding that they incessantly heighten their brand to maintain relevancy and value? Consider social networks. People have never been so close to the production side of media. People like Nicholas Perry, now better known by his brand name, Nikocado Avocado, one of millions of people with a YouTube account. His brand is eating large amounts of food. To maintain relevancy on the site, and by extension, financial stability, these challenges had to keep topping the previous. Nicholas broke 3 ribs in 2021 after all of the junk food in his system caused him, quote, excessive forceful coughing, end quote. He still uploads monthly. This one example barely scratches the surface. Howard Beale's exploitation by UBS is now happening on an unprecedented scale. The downside of Chayefsky's and the general use of play is that it's hard to make an immediate call to action. Many people to this day say that Network was a prophetic film. Little do they realize that the issues with today's mass media industry are the same issues that existed almost 50 years ago. Chayefsky successfully employed postmodernist techniques, but he may not have been explicit enough with his condemnation. They convinced an audience that the media industry had gone mad, but offered no solution or course for action. Thank you for listening.
The mad prophet of the airwaves was shot to death tonight in a fusillade of automatic rifle fire just as he began this evening's broadcast.
We never compromise. So why should you? Canada Dry Mixers. Why compromise?
Have you seen the other side of where you live?
Man of well over 6 feet carrying an automatic